So, Adrienne, you recently put together a very interesting focus piece, a special on The Chosen. For those who don't know, and I feel like I take it for granted because I work in the faith space and everybody sort of knows, but what is The Chosen? Describe it to us.
Well, if you talk to Dallas Jenkins, the creator, who I know you've spoken to many times, he describes this as a historical drama about Jesus Christ and his disciples. I originally was told about this from a friend. I had never heard of the show. They were on season 3 when I found out about The Chosen. And they said, "You've got to watch this show. It's powerful. Oh, it's beautifully done." And I thought, okay, like, what is it? And so just checking out the first episode, it was so moving. And the quality of the production is better than what we come to expect from a lot of projects that are centered around biblical stories or faith stories. And so you learn more about the people who follow Jesus, his first followers, his disciples, the apostles, more than you even learn about Jesus to me in those first few episodes. And throughout the seasons, you learn about the different personalities of people that ran with Jesus Christ when he was here on this earth. And I think that so many people are relating to this, The Chosen, because I mean, it's been streamed multiple millions of times because the story is a Gen Z or a 2023 interpretation of biblical stories that most people who've been churched have heard countless times, but maybe didn't see themselves in the story. And the characters, the way that they've produced this series, you see yourself, you see your own story in the stories of those disciples.
Yeah, and when you first heard about it, and then obviously you went down there, you guys put this special report together. It's called The Chosen Phenomenon. People can watch it over at NewsNation. But when you first heard about it and then started digging into it, were you shocked by the popularity of it? I mean, what went through your
Yeah.
mind? Because it is huge.
It's massive. They've already translated this this series, into 62 plus languages because they have ambitions, I think, to translate it into 200 languages. I mean, just something astronomical. When you look at the stats, it's been streamed when you break down by episode, it's been streamed 500 million times around the globe. The numbers were better than Game of Thrones, I know, at one point. So, what is this happening? Why are people drawn to this story of Jesus when it's the story as old as time? It's about, the most important man to the history of society at large. I mean, whether you're an atheist, an agnostic, or somebody who's devout, you've heard the name Jesus Christ, predominantly in our culture. If you're able to stream this show, you definitely have. And it's just done in such a way where Jesus himself is portrayed in this beautiful, peaceful, loving. I mean, the man who plays him, Jonathan Rumi, who famously also was in the movie Jesus Revolution, which hit theaters and was very successful. He really embodies his character. And I think that I was not only shocked at the quality, I was shocked at the popularity, how many people are watching it. I was surprised that most of the cast was agnostic. And I was surprised that Jonathan Rumi did such a great job portraying Jesus Christ. I think there's just all of these wow, wow, wow moments in a time and in a world where it takes a lot to impress us. And so, kudos to Dallas Jenkins, who has a legacy of storytelling from his father from the Left Behind series. But there's something special going on, and it happens to be south of Dallas in Midlothian, Texas, where they have this glorious shooting set that looks like the city of, I believe it's Capernaum. And you kind of just walk into this world, and all of the cast said the same thing. These are like family. These are new friends. There's a unity on set. So there's something to be said for all of these different types of people, diverse backgrounds, diverse faiths, all coming together, believing in what they're doing. Now, whether or not they all believe in Jesus is something else, but they do believe in the storytelling that is being produced for The Chosen.
Well, and as you said, it really is the most important story ever told, the most popular story ever told. The Bible's the best-selling book in history. I mean, we can go down the line. And so even for people who aren't believers, and I've heard from people who are not believers who are actually watching the show because they think it's interesting. They want to know, they want to sort of see through this lens and maybe understand who these, and I'm going to use the word characters are, but for Christians obviously believe this is all real. This really happened. These people
Yeah.
obviously existed. And so, it's interesting, and I want to talk more about your experience on the set and the special itself. But one of the things that has intrigued me the last few months, just as a journalist and somebody who looks at cultural issues, the culture is moving one way statistically away from faith, right? We're seeing fewer people say that they're Christians in America and more people who are nuns, the disconnected or atheists, but mostly people who are just disconnected from a faith. It's interesting to watch, though, Jesus Revolution, as you mentioned, this show, as you mentioned, all of these things exploding in popularity at the same time that dynamic is happening. What do you make of that as a journalist?
There's two things. One is I don't know that every poll is practically applied to society. I'm not a skeptic, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but the fact is that I want to know who they're asking. I want to know who they're talking to me, there's a resurgence of faith at this time. And I talked to Pastor Rick Warren, author of The Purpose Driven Life, in this special for The Chosen phenomenon. And he said that for him, what's happening is people are coming to the end of themselves in these very dark times that we're in. We're at a time of heightened financial pressure, economic uncertainty. We have an immigration crisis unlike anything we've ever seen in our country's history. We have more fear. We have more divisiveness politically. And then we come off the heels of this global epidemic pandemic. And, people can go around and act like everything's okay, but most of us went through something life changing, like life shaking, altering over the past few years that brought us to the end of ourselves or brought us to the heaviest grief that we'd ever experienced. To think that in all of these polls that people say, I don't believe in God, and that most people are angry with God, bitter with God, change their mind about God, I just don't know who they're talking to.
Yeah.
Because for a lot of people, they found their faith during these past few years. They found their faith in a time of crisis. And I'm always very curious to see, okay, what's the breakdown? What's the percentage of people they talk to who are this particular political party or that political party? What's the percentage they talk to of Catholics? What's the percentage of people they talk to who are agnostics? What's the percentage of people they talk to who identify as Christians but don't actually go to a physical church? And I think that I would demand, and I think we all should in journalism, a higher level of scrutiny over polling and a higher level of scrutiny over who exactly is being talked to and what kinds of questions are being asked. Because a lot of things look like they're one thing, but they end up being something else. And I really believe that it points to a time where it depends on the kind of question and who's asking it. And if their motivation is purely to inspire information, education, enlightenment, a solution, or it's to point out a problem.
Mm.
So I take everything with a grain of salt. And I really do believe that somewhere the curiosity and the appetite for God is much stronger than perhaps any of these polls suggest.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And there are a couple of things, an issue we are not talking about today, but one where I think as, a researcher as well, because I was sort of trained in polling, when you look at the abortion issue, everybody on both sides of that issue could look at different polls and tell a
Mhm.
story that backs their narrative, depending on how the question is asked, right? And so it really is so complicated. And one other thing, I mean, you mentioned this resurgence. I think we've seen this on college campuses anecdotally, but we saw 4,500 people show up to a mass baptism recently with Greg Laurie out in California. It was the biggest
Yes.
mass baptism, as far as we know, in American history, maybe even world history. And so there's clearly a lot happening there. And I think, these polls, when you go out and you ask people, are you a Christian? In a country where traditionally that was beneficial to be Christian culturally, a lot of people are saying yes, when maybe they're actually not living that lifestyle out. It's just sort of a label. So I do think there's a lot there. That proportion might go down, but you may have more people who are actually Christians or becoming Christians in the midst of that. So anyway, it's super interesting. I love that broke that down. I don't know if you want to reflect on that at all. I threw a lot, at you.
Well, no, the fact is I think that people who are Christian a lot of times don't want to participate in polling. I think that there's, they have no desire based on what they think of society, the government, what organization is asking me the question. I think there's a level of resistance to polls. And so I think that you are going to get a skew. Depending upon what city you're in, depending upon what community you're in, it's like, stay out of my business. I want to live my life, freedom of liberty, over freedom of your research. So I think that if people are going to really get to know what the faithful are thinking, no matter what denomination they're in, they're going to have to tell more stories. And I think that's why it's important that we at NewsNation, and I'm honored that my bosses and managers have been excited to tell these, that unless you get in and you tell the stories and you actually put a microphone in the faces of people who are believers, quote unquote, you really can't get a true picture of what faith is like in America, because the people who are telling the stories for so many years have considered faith taboo. And
Mm.
when you think faith is taboo, you have a whole different motivation and information gathering than somebody who's actually open to the faith conversation.
That's so true. Yeah, and I think we've seen that again and again, and that plays out in lots of different, facets of life and how things are interpreted wrongly because of that. But I wanna just ask you, because you put this special together, The Chosen Phenomenon, and you talked to Rick Warren. You were down on set. You interviewed the cast, as you said. What is your hope for what people will take away from this, this special? Because it really does give a lens into this show in a different light.
My favorite moment, and maybe it's because of my own experience, but when I saw the woman who plays Mary Magdalene breaking down in that episode, and just the fact that Dallas Jenkins' brilliance led to a woman's story being told first. I think that we've talked more about mental health, but it's such a broad term. I mean, mental health encompasses so many different things: trauma, depression, anxiety, different disorders that are clinical, and then different things emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually that people go through. And to see Jesus, this man who comes into her life not in a romantic role, but in a role where he was the only way she was going to get out. He was the only pathway to her not ending her life prematurely. I think that watching that and then talking to her, and in the Chosen special, hearing that at the time she auditioned for the role, she was living with her mother, thought her career was over, and thought her life was just, her career was at a standstill. She didn't know if she had any purpose. She went through her own battle with depression. She had no one she could turn to. And then this role comes up and she's like, okay, maybe I'll go for it. And it ended up being a pathway for her to light and hope by being a part of a project that was centered on hope, by being surrounded with people who are all in it for the same reasons, right? And so that kind of recurring theme to me is something that so many of us can relate to, especially if we've gone through hard things and we've come out the other side stronger.
Yeah, and that is what is so, beautiful about the series and the way that it presents who these characters are. It truly is. And
Yeah,
I,
powerful.
commend you guys for doing this special, for putting it together, and for going down there. What was one other thing before we go here that you noticed on set? I mean, you've told a lot of stories over the years. You've done a lot in media that you found unique or different from maybe an experience you've typically had in similar circumstances.
I would just say that I've interviewed a lot of people, and I enjoy it immensely. When I met Jonathan Rumi, I just have to say again how it was a powerful experience. Not because I have any confusion over who Jesus really is. It's like people come up to him and act like he's the real Jesus because of the show, which I'm like, okay, that's kind of interesting. But he went to the Vatican twice to meet with the Pope. He's a very devout Catholic. Out of that conversation and just how humble he was about it, and Dallas Jenkins too, my question to him was, are you making Jesus cool? And he said, I'm not making Jesus anything. And that was a similar answer from Jonathan Rumi. I'm not, I'm just allowing myself to be a vessel. And to see a whole cast and crew support and nurture that, um, I think that more and more of us have to realize that boldness doesn't always look like loudness. Boldness doesn't always look like standing up for what you believe in. And yet you can be resolute in your identity. And my hope is, and that's how I want to live every day of my life too, is that I get stronger and stronger in being so resolute in my identity. It's almost like a Bruce Lee approach, where you are so quiet within yourself, and yet you are so convinced that anybody that came up to you, like in martial arts, they would just be prepared to know what a force you are. And
Mm.
just hearing the way that Jonathan portrayed this character of Jesus Christ, I mean, big shoes to fill, with all the sincerity and all the humility and all the commitment, and yet making such an impact. It really does speak to the fact that we might all need to reconsider what impact and influence really means. And I hope that all makes sense, but and
It
it might
does.
sound a little too deep or poetic, but I truly believe that we have to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. know when to speak, know when to be silent, and know that even in our silence, if it's at the right time to be quiet, it's not a bad thing. But it is a time that we need to kind of look inward more and more, especially with the days that we're in.
I was just going to say, no, it makes perfect sense. And in light of the culture and where we are right now, that advice is deeply needed. Appreciate your time and coming on today to talk with us about this.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys running the story. And again, you can go to newsnationnow.com/the chosen. We have the special posted, but we also have all of the other videos of interviews that I didn't get to include. And some of them are just really sweet. Some of them are hilarious, but just talking about a lot of embracing differences and embracing each other. And I'll just tell you really quickly, I know we're almost out of time. One of the gentlemen, Noah James, who played in the role, he spoke quite frankly because I asked him, he was nervous. And he said he was nervous because he's a Jew and he wasn't sure he would be embraced in the environment that he was in coming in to tell us a biblical story. And he said he was wildly surprised at how welcoming everyone was and that he realized his own closed mindedness, that he's a lot more open minded today because of working on The Chosen. And I thought that was fascinating. Just his entire conversation was worth it. And you can find that on our website.
I love that. That's amazing. Well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Head on over and watch that, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Billy.